evening. Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, welcome to Newcastle University and the second Holmes Lecture of this year, which tonight will be on human vision. Just a couple of housekeeping points. I don't think we're expecting a fire alarm this evening, so if any alarms do go off, please remain calm and just follow one of the staff out of the exits of the lecture theatre and we'll take you to a meeting point outside. So, back to this evening and human vision. My name's Anne Fitchett and I work at the Institute of Neuroscience here at the university. And I'm very pleased that they asked us to do two lectures this year, both on vision, and hopefully some of you came last week and heard about animal vision. So today we're going to focus in on a very special animal, which is us humans. And we have four speakers this evening. We have Roman, Gabby, Wop and Michael. And they're all going to talk to you a little bit about human vision and introduce the areas that they work on. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Roman.
Thank you, Anne. And hello everybody, welcome to the first part of this lecture, which will be particularly about the eye. And as you will know, the vision or the visual system in general is usually very important system that helps us, guide us in our everyday lives. So when we talk with people, we look at them, or if we walk around, we rely on usually on vision. And so, also if we, for example, look at landscapes, then we rely on vision. And here is an example of a nice landscape. Does anyone know from where this landscape is, where this picture was taken? Yes? Very nice, well done, exactly. Actually, you get a prize. You have here some prizes. So when you look at this nice picture, you will notice that there are different kinds of things. There are objects, so there are, for example, trees. There are, for example, houses. There are lakes, hills. And not only are there these objects, but also they have certain properties, like, for example, color. And also, if you, for example, attend at a certain region of this picture, then you will notice certain things while not notice other things. And so attention is also something that is relevant here. And all these topics will actually be covered by my colleagues afterwards. Now, the first stage in how we see things is through the eye. So the light comes through our eyes. And the eye is a very, very powerful organ, and it's also a complex organ actually. So if you would pop out the eye and then show it in isolation, it looks in an idealized way, in a very simplified way like this. So you have here the eye, and the light comes from outside and then goes through the pupil, and then here comes to the back of the eye. And in the retina at the back of the eye, there are receptors that can detect the light from the outer world. So it can be mountains or whatever in the outer world. The light comes from there, and then those cells in the retina basically translate the light into electrical activity. So that's a very important part of how we see, is that light gets converted into electrical activity, and then afterwards it goes through the optic nerve to our brains. So the first step in this is through the eye. And there are also other parts that I cannot now explain much more, but what is important here is that the retina is the part of the eye where you have this translation from light to electrical activity, and then there are lots of other parts that also play a role. And that is also something important, namely the eye is a complicated organ. There are lots of parts that interact with one another, and obviously if you have such a complicated organ, then some things might work differently than they would work usually. So it might happen that the eye doesn't work very well anymore because some parts of the eye don't perform well. So I want to give you examples of that. So this would be a normal view of this landscape. But then there is one example of a disorder of the eye, which is called macular degeneration. And in this disorder, in the center of the retina, the center of the retina doesn't work well anymore. And these people at the beginning, they see gray patches in the center. That's how it usually starts at the very beginning. Actually, very early on, they might not even recognize that there's a difference. And as time goes on, it can happen that then this patch becomes larger, and also that the colors actually become less clear, so they fade away. You see that before there's a clear color, and then here not anymore, and also it becomes blurred, so it's not that clear anymore. And at the last stages, it becomes really very big, and so you cannot really see much in this case. So this is an example of an eye disorder that doesn't work because a part of the eye doesn't work anymore. And there are different reasons why this can happen. Actually, most of these disorders happens for older people, but not necessarily only. And the one main reason is because of genetics, so one cannot really do much about it. However, there is also another risk factor for this kind of disorder, which is because of lifestyle. So certain decisions that one makes in life could also have an impact on vision. Like, for example, smoking is something that increases the risk for this kind of disorder. Now, another example is diabetic retinotopia, where basically one sees patches in the visual scene. So at the very beginning, one sees all over smaller patches, and they are again increase in size over time. And also here, the colors become less clear and fade away. And also here, actually, one reason is not only genetics. So genetics plays a big role here too, but it can again be because of lifestyle decisions. So it can be, for example, by eating a lot of sweet and sugary foods, one can increase the risk for this kind of disorder. So there are these two main risk factors. One is genetics, where one cannot do a lot about it, but then there's also lifestyle, where one can really make a big change. So, as you can see, the eye is a very, very powerful organ, but it is also complex, and that's why one can get disorders that are not so easy to treat. However, there are scientists, researchers who work on improving the lives of these people that have certain disorders like this. So they try to find out how one could cure such disorders. And hopefully some of you also one day will become researchers that will help to find treatments for such eye disorders. But the most important step to cure this kind of disorders is, first one has to understand what's actually going on. How does the eye work? And so one has to really understand what do these parts in the eye do. And if one looks now at the retina, which is, as I mentioned before, at the back of the eye, and which actually plays a huge role, and so that's why also many disorders can happen if the retina doesn't work properly. Then one has to understand how does the retina work. And in the retina there are lots of different cells. So cells are basically the elements of of your body. So there are trillions of cells in your body, and also your eye is composed of cells. So there are, you can imagine like spheres, and those cells actually communicate with one another, and they make the retina work. So cells, you can imagine it a bit like this. So you have these spheres, and importantly, actually I have a question on this too. Does anyone know how cells or a major cell type in the brain is called? So there are also cells in the brain, obviously, and one major, yes? Sorry, I didn't hear that. Neural cells, exactly, perfect, very well done. Also, you will get a present, actually. Sorry, Anne, that you have to walk there. So, there are actually different cell types. And if one wants to understand how the retina works, one needs to understand how those different types in the cell work together. And so this is just a simplified version of that. There are certain types which might be bigger, some certain types which have a different shape than others. And they also have particular functions, so they play particular roles. Some cells might be involved in color, in how we see color. And so we really need to understand how do those different cell types work with one another and then make the eye functional. And this can become quite complicated because if some cells see something interesting, like let's say a color, then they will communicate this to other cells. And they again will tell to other friends that they should do something or become electrically activated. And so this can become really, really complex. And actually afterwards we will have a brief game where we will demonstrate that it's not easy to communicate with several people in a sequence. And to better understand this process, some researchers use computers, so very powerful computers actually, to write computer programs to mimic how cells in the retina, how they communicate. So I just want to give you an example of this. Here you see such a computer program, and these are neurons. They have different types. Like in the retina, we have different neuron types. And they, as you can see, they send these branches out, and that's how neurons communicate. So they can connect to one another, they can speak to one another just with electrical activity. And so they grow and make those connections, and you see that a very complicated network develops. And that would be very difficult to understand for a human being. That's why we use computers. And so that's basically what I wanted to show with this video, is really that we need to first understand how does the eye work, and that will help us a lot to treat disorders. And there are certain types of cells or neurons that play different kinds of roles. And Gabi, my colleague, will afterwards talk about this too. And yes, so that's it. Thank you.
So we are going to play a quick game. Roman told us all about how the different cells of the body communicate. But actually, if you've got a number of people or cells trying to communicate with each other, it can actually be really hard, and especially to keep the message the same from each person to person or cell to cell. So what I wanted to do was play a quick whisper game. So I'm going to choose 2 rows, and I think I'm going to go over here. So, and I take you and you. Okay, so I'm going to show these 2 people here, I'm going to show them a secret message that I've got, and they're going to then pass it on along the row to the other end. Now the only problem is, once you've seen this message, you can only tell the person next to you once, okay? You can't tell them again. So if they don't hear it properly, then they just have to pass on what they think, okay? So go ahead. Okay, so we'll have a quick look at this sentence. Okay. Okay, right, so back to your rows, and we'll have a ready, steady, and go. So remember, you can only tell the person once. Oh, we've got to the 3rd or 4th person. We're going along. Is the back row going slightly quicker? Oh, it's getting exciting. We just don't know who's going to win. Oh, where have we got to? Oh, only halfway. Have we got to the end yet? Yeah, you haven't. Should we give them a couple of minutes just to catch up? We know you're the winner. We good? Okay, great. So, you were first. What do you think the message was?
Also eat bananas quicker.
Okay. And? No. Not really. It was a good try. But the sentence was, the gorilla ate grapes in the garage with the green and grey grasshopper. Anyone? No? Fortunately, the cells in your body are a lot better at communicating than you guys are. But thank you very, very much. It was a really good effort. Round of applause, please. So now we're going to hear a little bit more about colour vision from Gavin.
Right, well, the power of communication, I just want to reassure you that we played this game yesterday and we were not much better than you. So just to reassure you. So now I'm going to have 15 minutes to persuade you that colour vision is pretty awesome, and I hope you agree. But at the same time, people tend to argue about colours quite a lot. Do you agree? It's really the old question, is the red that I see the same red as the red that you see? So this is really what it's all about, mainly about red-green colour vision. So why do we need it? What's the function of colour vision?
Is it to distinguish what naturally wouldn't it be to distinguish what is poisonous, what isn't, and what's generally dangerous?
Absolutely. It's the power of communication. Anyone else? Communicating whether something's poisonous, yeah. Absolutely, to distinguish one object from another. And there are many other reasons, but one of the main ones is to communicate. And we have signals in the world, and you see a lot of red, like the stop sign signals that you really should stop your car, otherwise there might be danger. Or the fruit is signaling to you that, you know, I'm ripe, or maybe it's not ripe, I shouldn't be eating you. But then there is a lot of aesthetics, so girls might like to put a little bit of makeup on, or you like to have a fashionable dress, like the one you've seen outside in the foyer. Lots of different things to communicate, but also, like you said, it enables us to see things, to kind of pick out objects. So, you know, this is probably not that easy, but there is a little poppy hidden, one little single poppy hidden in the grass, and I'll come back to that. So without colour, we're not particularly good at that. So my next question to you then is, how many colours do you think there are in the real world?
We can see our range of them, but apparently some animals see a different range.
I think that is an awesome answer. Yes.
The number of colours in the world are endless, depending on the shades and what perspective.
Endless. So we have endless, we have private, and then there's one more.
I think about a million.
A billion, that's pretty good, it's a pretty high number. So the actual answer is there are no colours in the real world. It's all in your heads. It is what your eye and your brain makes of the world. So I'll come back to that. Before I come back to it, I would like you to tell me what are the ingredients for colour vision. What do we need? Absolutely, I think there is a prize there. Fantastic. And to demonstrate that, so you know, we couldn't really find these Easter eggs easily if there were no light. So what Ans put together for us here in front is a lovely display of fruit. Can you see the different colours here? You can't see them easily if you sit at the back. Look around you at someone's colourful jumper. Look at my scarf. And now we're going to turn the lights off. So be seated just to be safe. Okay, and now. Right, actually there's still one on. Okay, well, no, we still haven't switched them all off.
No. There. Well, okay, now.
You can probably not see very much now, but you know, if you just point your eyes to the fruit where I'm standing. what happens to the colours? All gone. So the objects are still there, but the colours fade. So we definitely need colour in order to see. The next ingredient is in the eye, and this is what Roman already showed you. And at the very back of the eye, which is called the retina, there are specialized cells, and we call them cones. So I said, cones catches red light. We have typically 3 types of cone in the retina: the red ones, the green ones, and the blue ones. Okay, and what happens here? They catch light, which is photons in physics, of different wavelengths. So the red cones really like to catch red light. The blue ones prefer to catch blue light, and so on. So these are the main ingredients. The question I was once asked was, can you actually see these cones with your bare eye? And I've worked with school children before, and these are kids from St. Thomas More. I don't know whether we have anyone in the audience from St. Thomas More. They didn't believe me, they checked. So they got eyes, not from their friends, but from cows. They went to the butcher, the local butcher, and yes, you can't see them. Now they do believe me. But going back to my assertion that there are no colors in the real world. So here we have the poppy in the green grass. I would like you to do a little bit of work for me. So I'm going to try and mess with the colors in your head, because it's all in the head. And what I want you to do is to fixate on that blue poppy. While I talk, fixate really, really carefully and really, really hard. So what these cones do, they get excited. They get excited by light, by photons, but they also fatigue. So actually, if you can tell me whether this poppy field, one poppy in the green grass, looks real, just shout no or yes. No, they are all false colors. But what I'm doing right now, while you're looking at this, is I'm tiring out your blue cones, okay? But what's left, because the red cones and the green cones are not really playing in this game, they should be still quite fresh when I turn the slide over. And so I'm going to show you the black and white version again. But what I predict is that you see a red poppy in a green field. Okay, are you ready?
Oh my god!
Okay. So, this is that's the real one. I really wish our students were as enthusiastic as you are. It's just absolutely fantastic. Okay, so we have these 3 types of sensors in our eye, but I haven't told you yet. You know, if we only have red and green and blue sensitive cone cells, how come they kind of make something like orange, or all these millions of colors that you perceive in your heads, right? So here we have an orange, and the orange reflects orange light. It wouldn't if I switch the lights off, as you've seen. And let's say this is kind of a schema of like red cones, green cones, and blue cones, like a little bit of the retina. And let's say our orange light is seen by these cones there. So now we have different kinds of cells. They're also very specialized in the eye, and what their job is to compare the light that is caught by the red cones and by the green cones. So these cells are called ganglion cells, and we have lots of different types of ganglion cell in the eye that do all of these comparisons. So in this case, these are the kind of cones that catch the light reflected off the orange, and the red cones win. They catch more red light because there's more red light in an orange than green light. So they compute and calculate in your eye that this is the color. Okay, it's orange. Right, so back to the question of why do people actually argue? So here I was inspired last week by the minions. I chose my own minions. And what you can see here is that my female minion is quite assertive. Right? It's red. Of course it's red. The friend isn't particularly sure. Why is that so? The reason is that one of them is a girl and one of them is a boy. And I'm not saying that girls are always right, But the difference is, we're almost right, almost always right. But in terms of color, there might be a little bit of truth in it, because the genes, the genetic code that is actually responsible for making our red cones and green cones, are sitting on the sex chromosomes. And there's two types. We have the X chromosomes, and they are female sex chromosomes, and then we have the Y. So if you have two X chromosomes, you are a girl. If you have one and a Y chromosome, you're a boy. Now, the blueprint or the genetic code for making these red cones sit on the X chromosome. The ones for the green cones sit also on the X chromosome. And you can already see that our female minion has a slight advantage because, well, she has two copies, doesn't she? Whereas the boy only has one X chromosome. And now I have to tell you that these genes, the genetic information to make the red cones and the green cones, is actually really quite complicated, and they mess up all the time. 8% of boys are colorblind, so the information gets mixed up a lot. So in this case, he might have lost a cone, a gene, no green cones, and therefore the red Ferrari actually doesn't look so red to him. But he might still say it's red because that's what he's learned. So now is the time to come to explain to you why that is. So we have to go back into our deepest past, many, many millions of years ago.
As monkeys.
Well, quite. In those days, we actually only had one gene. So this is my X chromosome schema now, so that's not an X anymore, but that is how geneticists say, this is an X chromosome. So what you see, there's only one red band there, one gene that produced only red cones. So here we have our retina again, and the comparisons that have been made between, well, it's just between red cones and red cones, isn't it? So what you get is it's a nice landscape, but there's no visible poppies in there. We like landscapes here, don't we? Okay, and then something happened, and this happens in the world of genetics very, very often. Genes duplicate. So there was an event that happened about 30 million years ago, and then one of these, slightly later, mutated. So we got the green. What that did to our vision is we really now can tell where the poppies are. So looking for objects in the field is really much, much easier with 3 types of cones and more comparisons. Okay, now, back to the boys and the fact that they only have one X chromosome. So I've just said that, these genes mix up all the time. And that's because they're so close together on the X chromosome, and they're very, very similar. So in terms of development of the embryo, they mess up. And these are all the different possibilities that you can have as a boy. So you can have 2 genes, you can have only 1 gene, you can have 2 different genes. All these possibilities exist. So I just have 2 examples for you. This is a normal boy with the normal red and the normal green that produces a normal retina, and you can see Santa Claus in the snow. Okay? But if you have this scenario here and you're missing one, that is what Santa Claus looks like to you. And now the outfit really matches the tree quite nicely, doesn't it? Okay, so there's lots of other opportunities, and you just may want to think about what that means if you are a boy who has one of those different kinds of genes, and how do you go about your life? And you may need some help putting the right socks on. And there's lots of different things that you can think about at school, for instance. If you have to color something in, or if you're doing geography or chemistry, where you have to identify some chemical colors. And that concludes my bit. I just want to go back to last week. We don't want to be so arrogant with so many colors that we perceive. Most mammals, actually almost all mammals apart from us and the apes and the old world primates, are dichromats. That means they only have 2 types of cone, and they're all colorblind, like our 2% of boys who are also suffering from this colorblindness. But then, when you're looking at birds, some fish, goldfish, Insects, they have so many more cones. A butterfly has 5 types of cone, and a shrimp has 16. So now I just want you to imagine what that's like. And my advice to you, never argue about colors, because basically you're all right, okay? It's in your heads, and nobody else shares that information but yourself. So that was, actually, I think you probably deserve yes, you probably deserve a little present too for saying it's what we see. Okay, so now you're going to hear something even more exciting, and that's all about faces, and I pass it over to Wok. There you go.
Thank you, Gabby. So hopefully I can live up to what Gabby just said, that this will be more exciting than color. And I'll try to get some nice responses from you as well. What I want to focus on about faces is that human vision we're really sensitive to faces. We encounter them every day. We use it to recognize people, our friends, our teachers, our parents. We use it to judge their emotions. For example, that they're happy, they're sad. And based on that kind of judgment, we can decide what to do. If somebody's angry, we probably should leave them alone. If they're happy, you might be more willing to talk to them. So there's a lot of information from faces. What I'm going to focus on is to show you that humans are very sensitive to the identity, who the person is. That's one of the main functions of human vision, to recognize people from their faces. Now let's start with a little exercise. We like to get you guys involved. I'm not going to stop that. I'm going to ask you a very simple question, and it's really not a trick question. How many people do you see? I'm going to flash a slide at you. Obviously there's none right now. There's going to be photographs. There'll be a lot of photographs, but I don't want you to count the number of photographs. I want you to tell me how many people, individual people you see. So there might be several photos, pictures of the same person. As soon as you know the answer, just yell it out, just to see what kind of responses we get. Are you guys ready? Again, remember, just yell out how many people you see, not how many pictures you see. All right, here we go. Louder. Excellent. So I'm sure, hopefully you guys all recognize characters from Harry Potter. As I understand it, this is very popular. What you notice here is the pictures have different ages. It's Emma Watson, or I can't even pronounce her character's name. Thank you. At different age, and of course, as they've been aging. We see them from different viewpoints. They have different hairstyles. They cut their hair there, for example. Despite all of these changes to the actual images that you see, you're still able to very quickly recognize the individual, the person, and not the particular picture. So how do we do that? So part of this talk, I'll try to understand this a little bit, help you guys understand this a little bit. I'm going to do a test just to show you how quickly you're able to recognize faces. Now, if you were here last week, they also had an eye test, so it's very similar. I'm just going to show you pictures of people you should know, I hope, but only show you their eyes. So it's a very reduced image of a person. All you'll see is their eyes. There's going to be prizes, so pay attention. As soon as you recognize the person, put up your hand, but please don't yell out the name yet. And then Anne will select somebody and run. She's going to be very active right now. Okay, are you guys ready? Does that make sense? So remember, who is the person whose eyes belong to that person? Well, you know what I mean. Okay, here we go.
There's a girl here with brown hair. Yeah. It is.
Excellent. All right, are you guys ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Oh, I have to wait for Anne.
Forward, back there. Oh, you put your hand up. The girl there, with your hand up? Yeah, you had it up. Huh?
Ollie Mears.
No, not Oliver's. Boy there with the purple bottle, yeah.
Prince William.
It is.
Prince William, this is Prince William's. We could do this all day, I think. Okay, are you guys ready for the next one? There's about 3 more.
Girl, there was a pink water bottle. Yeah, you. Yeah. Pink water bottle. Yeah. Very good.
2 more, I think. All right, are you guys ready for the next one? Here we go. I think this will be a challenge. Oh, he definitely wins with the mouth. Who do you think? Ah, yes, excellent. just for the Newcastle United fans out there. All right, I think this is the last. Well, this is the last one with the prize, and then we have a special one at the end. Are you guys ready? Here we go.
It's not. Yep. No. Back there, the blonde there? Very good.
All right, and just to show you how sensitive we are to people's faces, this is the last one, I promise.
No, fine.
There's no prizes. Just yell out, who do you think it is? Thank you. Okay. So obviously you guys are a lot better than I tried to make it a bit difficult, but you guys did very well. But you saw just by looking at the eyes, for example, you guys were very good at recognizing the person and very quick and accurate. Can you do it with but are the face parts by themselves enough? Is the eyes enough? Is it just the mouth, the nose? Do we just look at these? I'm going to try and convince you that the face parts, the way humans look at faces, is not really just using the face parts. They're important, but there's other aspects about faces that are also important. So to do this, I'm going to do a few demonstrations looking at strange faces. Do you guys like illusions?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was going to be a short talk. Okay, so this is the first illusion. I'm going to switch over in 1 second. Oops. I'll do that. Yeah, 1 second. Don't die on me. Okay, I'm gonna show you a face. I'm sure you'll recognize it. Do you guys recognize that face? Yeah. So it's Kate Middleton. Sorry, we're not playing the game. But do you notice any? Do you guys notice anything strange about that face? I think some of you saw it. I think some of you saw the demonstration with Jess outside. So there is something strange with the face. Sorry. Now what we're gonna do now, so this face, I think everybody recognizes this face, and that's good. And what we've done is basically, as you probably noticed, we've taken the eyes, the nose, and the eyes and the mouth, and we've just rotated them in the face. And then we rotated the whole face. Now what I want you guys to do is make the face look even stranger. We can actually, even though this looks like a strange face of Kate Middleton, we can actually make her look even stranger. And some of you are doing it the physical way, which is great. But we can all participate now. So parents, teachers, kids, what I want you to do, I'm giving you permission to make as much noise as you can. The more noise you make, the more the face will become more and more strange. So are you guys ready? This might be bad. All right, go for it. I hope we haven't we're going to get in trouble, so let's, okay, I'm going to stop that now, because otherwise you guys are going. Okay, so all we've done is, So one face, when Kate is upside down, she looks a little strange, and I think all of you noticed it. But when we invert her, when we put her right side up, she looks really strange. The reason is that we're so used to seeing the eyes above the mouth, above the nose, and so on, that when it's in a familiar arrangement of parts, we notice strangeness a lot more than when it's not in a familiar arrangement of parts. So I hope that makes sense. And please don't report me to the royal family as well. Okay, the second illusion, what I'm gonna do is, all you guys have to do is fixate on the cross. I hope everybody can see the little white cross in the center of the screen. Things are gonna be I'm just gonna be flashing faces at you, but don't look at the face yet. Try to keep your eyes on the cross. Nothing's gonna happen to the faces. They're just gonna be flashing at you. And it might take a few flashes before you notice anything, but just keep your eyes fixated on the cross and see what happens. Wow. And you can look at the faces if you want. So you might be noticing that the parts. So you might have noticed that the parts, all the eyes and the mouth and the eyes, the mouth and the nose and so on, they all sort of get distorted, and in fact it's called the flash face distortion effect. So these are very cool demonstrations, I think, as I can guess from the volume. But what do they tell us? So actually, by using these kinds of illusions and using also experiments in the laboratory, we can try to understand why is human vision so tuned to faces, to these sort of parts and the arrangement of these parts. So from all of these different studies, we know that in the brain, there are special regions. I've indicated those in red. That's called the fusiform gyrus. And that region is particularly active or involved when we see faces. Now, as Roman and Gabby were talking about, there's a lot of neurons in those regions, and these neurons are interconnected to each other, and they talk to each other. And they talk to each other whenever they see a face. And the way, as my colleagues have talked about before, the way they talk to each other is through electricity. They send little jolts of electricity from one neuron to the other neuron. And because they're using electricity, we can actually measure, we can actually listen in on their conversations to understand what's going on. Now there are patients who have epilepsy, and that's when the talking between neurons are a little bit too loud, so we have to be able to monitor the activity of brain cells, these neurons. So what doctors will do is they'll stick electrodes or little wires into the brain so that they can actually listen to the brain on the surface of the brain. But what doctors can also do is put little jolts of electricity into the brain, very small amounts, nothing harmful to the patient. And what they found was that if you stimulate neurons in the fusiform gyrus, that red area, then we actually get similar effects that you guys experience through the illusion. And this is work my colleagues in Belgium have done it, and I'll just show you some examples of that. Now what I'm going to show you in this video is a doctor interacting with the patient. He's just showing her pictures of famous people that she knows. Unbeknownst to the patient, every now and then the doctor will stimulate those cells in the fusiform gyrus, but the patient doesn't know it. The screen will turn red when that happens, and you can see her response. It's in French, but luckily there's some English dubbing on top. So now the stimulation comes on. So she didn't recognize a famous person she usually knows. Our famous Johnny. I'll mime for her. So again, as soon as the doctors stimulate her fusiform gyrus, she experiences this rearrangement of the parts exactly like you guys experienced while looking at the illusion. Now I'm just gonna. So what's important? What I wanted to highlight. I hope I've shown you that human vision is very sensitive. It's very tuned to faces. There are special areas of the brain that seems to be highly involved in processing, in looking at faces, and it seems to be based on looking at the parts and the arrangement of those parts. But just looking at these features aren't the only thing. It also depends on how we attend to faces, as my colleague Michael will present next.
All right, thanks, Walk. That was great fun. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit. Oh, I see we're a little bit short in time. We should stop at 6. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we can make that happen. Everybody knows what attention is. If you don't, let's just view a couple of examples. Do you remember what my colleague Gabi said about what neurons combine the cone input? Who remembers that? What are these cells called that combine what the cones are doing? Anybody? Yeah? You? The cones, and then afterwards, the guys who do the weighing between the different cones, yes? Yeah? All pretty good. I think we showed the effect that I wanted to see. She said very briefly they are called ganglion cells. They combine the input from the different cones. And she just mentioned it once briefly. Now, I noticed, because I'm a vision scientist and I pay attention to these things, but to you guys, you don't have probably, I guess, not so much experience in it yet, so it easily slipped your attention. That is what attention is. Another example is, in Gabi's example also, remember the red poppy field? But initially she showed it just with a grayscale image. And in order to, you kind of knew what a red poppy seed is, but in order to see it, you sort of really had to search with your eyes on that grayscale image until you found it. You know? So that's also what attention is searching for something. Now, let's do one test here that will hopefully also show you what attention is. That's a very tricky task that I'm doing now with you. And I want you to really, really work very, very hard. The instruction is going to be given in that video. Basically, you'll see basketball players who will pass on a ball to each other. And I want you to count how often they're doing that. Okay, are you ready? Focus on the white players. How often are they passing the ball? It's tricky, huh? So, your hand was up first. How often did you count? Yes.
16.
16? I think that's probably right. Can we have a reward for him? Good count. I heard a smile occasionally. Why did people smile? Yes, your hand was up. There was a gorilla. Is it often that you see things that other people don't see? You know, you're perfectly right. You saw a gorilla. And you don't have to see your doctor. Let's just see it again. Let's just see the... Let's just look at it again. This time, don't count, but just observe basically what's going on in the scenery. Okay? Now watch who's coming. Probably many of you have not seen it. And that's great, because I told you not to look at the black gorilla. Once I tell you there's a black gorilla, it's hard not to see it. But you realize the power of attention. It really makes us see certain things while we ignore others. So I told you already in one of the examples that eye movements are important. So people at the university in the labs have studied that quite carefully. For example, they looked at when we human subjects look, for example, at faces, like the faces that we saw in Wok's presentation. Where do they look at? And it turns out we are particularly looking at the eyes and the mouth. So on the left, you see the face that the subject saw. On the right, you saw where their eye looked at, where their center of gaze was, and you see it was predominantly over the eyes and the mouth. That's another example in this scenery. So people here in this painting, they scan faces of people. But on the example on the right, what you see is that when the instruction to the subjects was given not to freely explore the scene, but to judge about whether this family is rich or poor, their eye scanning actually changed, and they looked more at what the people were wearing to get an estimate of how they're doing. Who knows about Scotland Yard? There are a few hands. Yes, we played that game among colleagues yesterday, and not many of the grown-up colleagues know what Scotland Yard is. But so Scotland Yard is a game where you have to find Mr. X on the map of London, right? And how do you do that best? How can you know what Mr. X is doing or where he's hiding? By looking at his eyes also, right? And so therefore in this game, Mr. X has to wear this hat that hides his eyes. Otherwise the game would be totally easy and we could all see sort of where Mr. X is looking at the map. So how is attention done in the brain? I repeated already that our eye movements are important. So there's eye movement centers in the brain that actually control the muscles that move the eyes. But then there's also the visual input through the cones, for example, that go into the visual cortex. And these eye movement centers, in addition to moving the eyes, what we think they're also doing is they're acting like a searchlight on the visual cortex. So you can think of it like this. So if there's a black box in visual cortex, we don't see anything. What the searchlight will do is will bring about sort of the dark hidden things. Are there problems with attention? Sometimes. Everybody of us has lapses of attention. But there can also be patients with certain attention deficits. One is called hemi-neglect, and this patient had a problem in part of these eye movement controlling centers of the brain. And if we had more time, I would show you a video of the patient, but you can Google that at home if you want. I'm just going to show you what the problem of the patient is. So the patient was asked actually to copy that clock here. And when he draw it, then you can see he knows what a clock is, but basically he can only do that in his right. He can only copy the right part of the clock, while he cannot copy the left parts of the clock. And these are other examples, sort of from the cat, for example. He's ignoring, he's neglecting, as we say, the left part of the cat. They're not doing that only in drawing, but also sort of this patient here who has to shave is actually also ignoring the left half of his own face when shaving. yeah, and scientists are trying to understand better how the brain deals when you have such an injury, and they are trying also to help the patients. And hopefully, you guys learned today a lot about many aspects of visual function in the brain, and so how it can be affected, and hopefully you're motivated to join us at some point at the university and learn more about that and how we can improve that. With that, I should probably leave it real quick to Anne.
Thank you to Michael. Thank you to all our speakers this evening, and thank you to you for listening. So thank you to Roman, Gabby, Wat, and Michael. We do have a couple of minutes left, so if the speakers want to come out and join, and if anyone has any quick questions about anything you've heard tonight, or indeed anything else. Question at the back in the blue. What does it mean to be colourblind?
Oh, we have an answer here. Oh, you have another question. Okay. Well, that's a very good question because you've seen the simulations. So with some of the types of color blindness, we can simulate what it is. So you, as somebody who has normal color vision, can appreciate the difference. Somebody who is colorblind cannot appreciate what it means to be a normal person. Okay. Because all the perceptions are private. They're all kind of just in our heads, as I said before. So it's very tricky. It's a very good question.
With the question at the front there, yeah?
What's the least common type of colour blindness?
The least common type of colour blindness?
The least common type is when you have no cones. So somebody who has achromatic vision, meaning just perceives something in black and white. So, two types of cone missing. So that's really, really rare. It does exist, though.
So you had your hand up there in the jumper with the bag in front of you. Yeah, yeah, you.
Are there different types of colour blindness?
Yes.
Are there different types of colour
Yes.
blindness?
Lots of different types. You remember the picture I showed you with all the different X's? So you can have a red cone missing, or a green cone missing, or they can mix up when you can have some sort of intermediate. You can have a yellow cone or an orange cone rather than a red and a green. There's lots of different types.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be blind?
What does it mean to be blind?
It's a good question.
Good
too.
question.
Roman?
Yeah, it's a good question because there are different degrees of being blind, right? As I showed you, maybe you remember there are these different. First, there are different diseases where you have different kinds of blindness. You usually start with very little bit of defects at the beginning of some disorder. Like, for example, I showed this example with the patch in the middle, which then slowly increases. And so, in the end, when one is really completely blind, then one basically just doesn't see any light from the outer world anymore. It can be still that one in the head generates kind of images, but that's another topic of this. So it's a very complicated thing, actually. Yeah.
I would also maybe add so that there's different forms of blindness, right? So you saw different spectra, right? One is sort of extreme, where you really have a loss of your visual world, where sort of we think it's sort of grayish. Color blindness, you've seen the face blindness, or sort of attentional blindness, which is questionable. Is that still a blindness? So I think there's different forms of it.
I think we do have to finish because I know that we have to finish on time at 6. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our speakers.